Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episodes 25 and 26 of Season 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man called, respectively, Revealed and Rise of the Goblin. So this is it. This is our big season finale for Ultimate Spider-Man. It's been a pretty solid season overall. It's had its ups, it's had its downs, it's had its low points, it's had its high points. But overall, I would say this is a really solid really solid couple of episodes, and overall, despite having its low points, this has proven to be a pretty solid show overall. It is, at the end of the day, a pretty worthy addition to the Spider-Man mythos in my book. But anyway, let's dive right into what's going on this time around. So this is our big, Rise of the Goblin is an appropriate title for what we're looking at here. This is not Norman Osborn making his transformation from, jerk guy, businessman to the Green Goblin, easily acknowledged as Spider-Man's unquestionable arch enemy. And of course, we get the sign of Norman Osborn being a jerk right off the bat. I did get a kick out of his line about how Harry should buy himself a meal worthy of a B minus, and I think that was just there to really, again, remind us just how Norman tends to treat Harry, because so much of the way Norman and Harry interact this episode is really rooted in Norman's love for Harry. But, well, Norman's a guy who very much believes in conditional love. There is no unconditional love in the heart of Norman Osborn, much to Harry's disappointment. Now, I did get a few a few kicks out of some of the jokes that were thrown out this episode. I enjoyed Spider-Man's reference to friends and family. If you're somebody my age, that probably makes your memory jog at some old AT&T commercials. And of course, we got to see the Frightful Four one more time, again bringing us back full circle to where we started this series off at. And of course, once again, the Trapster is out of prison. I'm seriously wondering if I should just even stop thinking about why it is none of these guys can stay in jail. It's just proven too frustrating. A part of me wishes there was something a little stronger than water in that thing. But let's get right into it. Another kick I got out of that fight with the Octobots was the observation that this is what we've trained for. Well, that is true. We have seen the team spend an absolutely inordinate amount of time this season trashing robots. I have to say that was a little bit of clever setup, or at least an amusing acknowledgement of a bit of, I don't know if I want to say cliche. I think reoccurring element would probably be a much more accurate term in that situation. But anyway, it made me smile. I thought that was funny. And I also did get a kick out of hearing Nova referred to as Buckethead. That is, of course, the classic nickname for Nova in the comics. Usually used by Speedball, if I remember correctly, but New Warriors is not really one of the comics that I'm super familiar with. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, Nova is best known for, team-wise, being a member of a group called the New Warriors. And they actually, I believe I've mentioned this before in the series, if you actually do want to check out some really good comics, go and read like the first 25 issues of that series. Those comics are like 20 years old, but they're still really, really good. But anyway, and of course we did hear Nova refer to Spider-Man as Webhead. That's tradition. That's another nickname that Spider-Man has had used by that many of the other superheroes in the Marvel Universe have for Spider-Man. And Actually, I believe it's Johnny Storm, the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four, who's the one that uses it the most often. But nonetheless, I did get a big kick out of that. It's the little continuity nods that really, really make this episode. But speaking of stuff that really make this episode, the fight between Norman and Doc Ock, that was some pretty intense stuff. I don't think Doc Ock was really. I don't think the fight could have really been everything that it could have. If Doc Ock had really had his proper arms, that really could have been a throwdown for the ages. But him in his Dr. Jellyfish form, as Spidey so aptly put it, just doesn't really present the sort of epic, legendary kind of throwdown that I was hoping for in that situation. On the other hand, the confrontation on the emotional level between Osborn and Ock, that was really good stuff. Even in that situation, a guy is out there as narcissistic as Norman still thinks that after everything he did to him that he ultimately helped Osborn. He genuinely doesn't understand why Osborn isn't grateful to him for what he did. And of course, the supreme irony of what happens there, that Doc Ock totally relishes, is that he's able to turn the tables on Norman. He is able to do, in a way, everything that Norman did to him to Norman. It is his goal in that scene. He even makes it perfectly clear. He wants to make Norman his slave. He wants him to take his place, where he himself even said that he felt like Norman had made him his slave. So Doc really wants to do that 180 there. And it doesn't quite work out for him. But again, it is nice that Doc Ock, of all people, is the one that points out the parallel between what happens here with Spider-Man. Norman Osborn, in a way, created Spider-Man, and now it is Spider-Man who, in a way, creates the Green Goblin. Really, Doc Ock here is sort of a middleman in a way. It's the genetically engineered spider from Oscorp that makes Spider-Man, and it's Peter Parker's DNA that transforms Norman. And that sort of symmetry is something that really is very in keeping with the Spider-Man mythos. It goes right back to Peter making the decision to let that thief go, and then having the thief turn around and kill one of the few people in his whole world that truly matters to him. These painful, bitter ironies, these people in his life that Peter cares about, oscillating, between being friend and foe. That is just classic Spider-Man. It's happened to him so many times that people he has cared about have met their end at the hands of his enemies, or have in fact even become his enemies. And that's really one of the truly things that makes Spider-Man truly great. It's that almost Shakespearean element of tragedy that is constantly a presence in Spider-Man's life that makes him such a great character. But, okay, I think we've gone enough in the literature professor direction for the moment. So let's pull things back. Let's move on to what we see going on. Of course, we get our big fight with Spider-Man and the team taking on Norman. And first of all, I have to say, the whole battle music that we see constantly when the team and Spider-Man are fighting the Goblin, that's awesome stuff. That music there, that battle music, that is far more memorable to me than any music that I have heard in any of the last 4 Spider-Man movies. If I really stretch it, I can maybe vaguely recall what the theme music from the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man music sounds like. But the music from this episode, I'm not going to have any trouble recalling that battle theme. I think to me, maybe it won't quite reach the sort of iconic status that, say, the 60s Spider-Man theme song has, or the very classic guitar riff music from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. of course, a theme song is going to be far more memorable than background music. But nonetheless, I do think that is a truly wonderful piece of music. It really is very dramatic, very exciting, fun to listen to, and it just enhances the battle scene. And really, that's what background music is there for. So, some definite props to the music department on this show for that. Now, let's see here. Just looking at my notes for a moment. Yeah. I don't want to get too big into this, but one complaint that I do have is apparently the acronym for what SHIELD stands for in this particular universe has changed. It's changed to like Homeland has been changed. In the comics, I believe it's supposed to be Hazard, like strategic Hazard. Okay, what SHIELD stands for has, I believe, changed a little bit over the years, but I don't like the inclusion of the whole Homeland thing. First of all, it's just because, as I understand it, SHIELD is a international organization. However, and this is how I understand it to work in the comics. SHIELD is an international organization. However, it receives the majority of its funding from the United States. That's why the majority of its staff are Americans and has so much of its stuff is based out of the U.S. Because it is established there are SHIELD agents from other countries. I remember reading a miniseries a while back that had a SHIELD agent who was a Wakandan, which I always thought was really cool. I thought that international aspect made SHIELD a much more interesting organization, but sadly that aspect of SHIELD hasn't gotten really played up very much. Here, just going by the whole Homeland thing, it makes it seem as if SHIELD is entirely an American organization, which, as I said, I don't particularly care for, but okay, I'm not going to get worked up over this. Now, coming back to the storyline itself, one thing that I really liked, and this is a very subtle thing, if you're not paying really close attention to the episode, you might have missed it. The Goblin even says that Norman Osborn is jealous of Spider-Man. He's jealous of that power. And I love that. I love that they just flat out acknowledge why it is that Norman has such a mad on for Spider-Man. I mean, yes, they've said that he wants to create super soldiers and have an army so that SHIELD and Tony Stark can't touch him. But at the end of the day, it's not greed that drives Norman Osborn and his feelings towards Spider-Man. It's simple envy. Spider-Man has something that Norman does not. Spider-Man is powerful. Spider-Man is skilled. Spider-Man has energy and vitality. And Norman is just a man. He's a brilliant man. He's a wealthy man. He's a smart man. But at the end of the day, Norman Osborn is a man in a suit. And Spider-Man is something that is more than a man. He's something that is more than a man that runs around in a crazy spandex costume cracking jokes, but it doesn't change the fact that Spider-Man is more than human. He is, in some ways, undeniably more ultimate just by his nature than Norman Osborn could ever be. And that is what drives Norman crazy. He just cannot stand the idea of someone being more powerful than him. And this is why he really has that animosity towards SHIELD, towards Tony Stark. Norman is one of those people that, unless he is the undisputed king of the mountain, he can't be happy. If there's anyone out there who could possibly be a threat to him, if there's anyone out there who could possibly be his equal, he can't be happy. He cannot be happy. He is the guy who believes in that dog-eat-dog world that is constantly afraid of someone being stronger, smarter, more powerful than him. Norman is a guy who, at the end of the day, is not ruled by greed. He's not even ruled by envy. At the end of the day, it's really fear that rules Norman. Okay, I think I've laid enough heavy stuff on you for the moment. Now, let's get back to the mythology aspects of the show real briefly. We do see Kurt Connors get his arm messed up really badly. This is doubtlessly a nod to his origin in the comics as the Lizard and him becoming that way out of a desire to get his arm back. Now, the other week, I happened to see an interview with two of the guys from Man of Action, Steve Siegel and Joe Kelly, two of the guys who, of course, have a long history of Spider-Man in the comics, who have helped bring the show into being. And one of the things that they mentioned in that interview is that for various reasons, they weren't able to do a lot of the classic Spider-Man villains this season. And, small spoiler, I guess, that's going to change next season. So I'm really looking forward to that because, as great as what we've gotten this time around, as much as I enjoy seeing the characters from the various aspects of the Marvel Universe turn up around here, of course I want to see them take on the classic Spider-Man villains. I want to see them do Mysterio and Electro and the Lizard. Heck, I'd even be happy if they did the Spot. For some reason, I've always gotten a kick out of the Spot. And I certainly wouldn't object to seeing Black Cat. She's not exactly a villain, but I've always had a real soft spot for Black Cat. I really enjoy her. So I'm definitely looking. I think that's something definitely to look forward to. And just to kind of further comment on the nature of the show, one of the things that people have complained about that Joe and Steve mentioned in the interview is one. At the end of the day, the core audience for this show is kids 6 to 10 years old. Honestly, I thought it was 10 was sort of where they were starting with where they were going for, and kind of going for the 10 to 14 crowd. Maybe I'm just a little too old to gauge this sort of thing properly, but one of the things that Joe Kelly did specifically mention was was the way the sort of little asides and chibi Spider-Man cartoony jokes is their way of interpreting sort of the thought balloons and things like that Stan Lee had used back in the old days. Now, granted, okay, maybe they could just do that with narration, but it doesn't pack the same sort of visual punch and kick that the more humorous asides that we get on this show do. And again, at the end of the day, this is a show designed to appeal to 6 to 10-year-olds. And kids, of course, are going to eat stuff like that up. I mean, I work with kids, believe me. They're going to love this. As I've even said before, if I was a kid 10 years old watching this show, I'd think it was awesome beyond all words. As an adult watching the show, I just simply have to acknowledge the fact that this isn't really a Spider-Man show that's aimed at me, but it is something that is aimed as a respectful interpretation of the Spider-Man mythos. And on that, I can't deny that I think that it succeeds. Now, with that said, let's move on. There is two more little things that I'd like to talk about in terms of relations to the comics. First of all, we have the grand Marvel tradition of having a SHIELD helicarrier crash. It is really absurd just how often this happens. It's kind of... the TV tropes actually calls this the Worf effect, and this is a reference to whenever they wanted to show that an alien on Star Trek The Next Generation was badass, they'd have it show up and beat up on Worf. So whenever they want to show something as a big threat, in the Marvel Universe, one of the things they always seem to have it do is destroy a SHIELD helicarrier. It's kind of a ridiculous cliche. But let's get to the last point that I want to talk about this episode, and this is Spider-Man's relationship with Nick Fury and the team. Well, I don't really think there's a lot to say about what's going on between him and Nick Fury this episode. Nick Fury even flat out says that, as far as he's concerned, Peter... So he says, what I saw up there was looked pretty ultimate to me. As far as he's concerned, while Peter may still have a lot to learn, he's definitely come a long way. He has enthusiastically gained Nick Fury's approval. And I have to say that after what we've seen this episode, Spidey's earned that. Now, the relationship with his team. This is a little aspect of the program where I kind of have my main gripes. Peter's talking about how his team are their family and how much he cares about them and all this other stuff, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's keep in mind, this is the team that is full of guys who have constantly insulted him for no real good reason, have repeatedly ignored his leadership after even acknowledging that he is the most experienced out of all of them, have continuously and on multiple occasions, despite Peter's fervent requests, shown complete and utter disregard for his desire to protect his secret identity, and have just sort of often been complete and utter dicks for no reason. But here, they're the bestest friends in the whole wide world. Peter, let me just say that things had better be significantly different between you and the Amazing Friends next season, or I'm really gonna be screaming BS on that. But that said, I do like the twist that the Amazing Friends are going to be moving into Peter's house with him and Aunt May. This is, again, very indicative, very similar to what happens in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, where Gwen Stacy and Bobby Drake from the X-Men and even Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four end up living together with Peter. Aunt May kind of turns her house into sort of a teen home. And honestly, it's actually pretty awesome. And we finally get a little bit of insight into the personal lives of the Amazing Friends. I mean, this is one of the things I've complained about a few times before over the course of the series, is that we really know nothing about them outside of their being at school with Peter and helping him fight crime. I think I even complained, like, hey, why don't one of these guys invite Peter over to their house? I know in the security camera thing, I was sort of complaining about how, aren't these guys upset that the SHIELD might be watching members of their family? Well, here we get a little insight into that. These guys may not have family. Now, there's way too much history in regards to that to get into, so I'm not going to get into what I know about these characters' families in the comics. There's just way too much going on, and we really don't know too much. I think that's a discussion that's best saved for next season. But one thing I do hope we get to see next season is the origins of the various Amazing Friends. I think this is something that's kind of overdue. I think they really do need to start expanding as individual characters and not just being planets that orbit Spider-Man's sun. Let's put it that way. So with that said, folks, overall, as I've said, this show, while not without its flaws, is pretty darn good. I've had a lot of fun watching this show this season. And thinking back to how I was kind of unhappy with the show when it was first getting off the ground, kind of finding its feet, where we are now, I'm totally on board with this. I acknowledge that I'm not the show's target audience, but at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that I can't have fun with it. That I can't enjoy the nods to the Marvel Universe, that I can't laugh at Spider-Man's jokes, and just enjoy a good Spider-Man story. And really, if you can sit there and enjoy a good Spider-Man story out of this show, then really, what do you honestly have to complain about? So with that said, folks, again, I proclaim this show to be a genuinely good addition to the Spider-Man mythology. Definitely looking forward to next season. Anyway, I think I have repeated myself unnecessarily enough times, so I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter @HoosierJedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.